So good morning, everybody. I asked that, usually even in conference halls, they never give a clock. So I said, please, could we have some kind of a clock?
So we don't miss a tea break, Jetsunma.
Yes, thank you. Yes, that's important things we must remember. Oh, yes, sure. Yeah, so of course the subject of this weekend's talk is something called the Four Dharmas of Gampopa. Dharmas here means like topics or teachings. And you all have a copy, yes?
Yes.
So you know what they are. Okay. So, just looking to see. So, Gampopa. How many of you don't know anything about Buddhism? How many of you know something about Buddhism? Just get an idea. How many of you know anything about Tibetan Buddhism? Okay. So anyway, in Tibet there were four main lineages which had been brought from India at various times. The earliest was called the Nyingmapa, which was introduced into Tibet in the 8th century by somebody from the Swat Valley called Guru Padmasambhava, who is very important in the Tibetan tradition and is regarded as being the second Buddha. Then there were periods of progress and regress over the centuries. And then by the 11th century, there were definitely problems. And so at that time, many Tibetans were going back to India to find teachers, Buddhist teachers in India to make again the connection with India, which was the motherland, but also to clear up their doubts and try to make sure that they were on the right track. So many Tibetans went to India, but at the same time many Indians were invited into Tibet. So there was again this crossroads of Tibetans going out, Indians coming in, and a whole resurgence of interest in Buddha Dharma at that time. So one of these, after the first lineage of the Nyingmapa was formed in the 8th century, then in the 11th century came another two important lineages. One is the Sakyapa lineage and the other is the Kagyu lineage. Then in the 14th century, after Buddhism had already been destroyed in India, so there was no point in going to India anymore. Nonetheless, a very great scholar and yogi called Tsongkhapa brought together all the different lineages, decided which lineages he felt was the most important, which doctrines were the most important. And he then established what is nowadays called the Gelugpa tradition, which is the Dalai Lama belongs to. But the Kagyu tradition is the tradition which Gampopa is identified with. This started from India, from Tilopa, who was a kind of mad yogi. The Kagyus are known, each tradition has its own emphasis. its own taste. They're all Buddha Dharma. And there's not that one is right and one is wrong. But as in Hinduism or in Christianity, there are many different schools. And each has its own emphasis. Some are more scholastic, some are more devotional, some are more yogic, and so forth. And this was also true in Tibet. Each of the traditions has its own flavor and its own emphasis. They're all good. There's not one is better than the other. But each one has its own tone, so that different people are attracted to different traditions depending on their innate aptitude. So therefore the Kagyu tradition is also called Kagyu, means an oral transmission, because in the early days these teachings were transmitted orally. But it's also called a Drupyu, and Drup means to practice. So that gives the idea again that it is a lineage where yogic practice was especially emphasized. Of course they had great scholars, but the emphasis was always on practice, and especially on the yogic practices. So Tilopa was considered to be the founding father of the Kagyu lineage in India. He was from Bengal and was manifested as a kind of mad yogi type, sitting by the banks of the Ganges, throwing live fish onto the fire and eating them, etc. Just against all our ideas of what nice, good little Buddhists do, right? In order to break through concepts. Now, his main disciple was somebody called Naropa, who had been the chancellor of the great Buddhist monastic university of Nalanda. At one time, Naropa, who I think was from Kashmir. Was he from Kashmir?
Leh, I think.
Huh?
Leh?
Leh?
Ladakh?
No, it couldn't have been Ladakh. It must have been Kashmiri.
Because the Naropa celebrations were...
Yeah, but that's because of Hemis, which came much, much later. No, I think it was Kashmiri. Anyway, he was the chancellor of Nalanda University. And one time this old woman appears and says to him, do you understand the words that you're reading here? And he said, yes, of course. He was a great pundit. And she said, do you understand the meaning of what you're reading? And he thought, well, when he said he understood the word, she was happy, so let's make him more happy. So he said, yes, of course I understand the meaning. And then she burst into tears. And he said, what's the problem? And she said, well, you said you understood the words. Yes, you understand the words, you don't understand the meaning. And he said, well, who understands the meaning? And she said, my brother Tilopa. You go and find him. So then Naropa leaves the university and goes wandering off looking for Tilopa. And I mean, there's a whole long story about meeting Tilopa, and then Tilopa spending the next 12 years pushing all of Naropa's buttons. You know, like they're standing on the top of a high building, and Naropa says, if I had a real disciple, they would jump from this building. And so Naropa looks around and there's nobody else. So, you know, well, what the hell? So then he jumps and bashes himself up pretty badly, and then, you know, eventually he comes to and then he gains some realizations. And I mean, but Tilopa puts Naropa through a lot of tests, and he gets, eventually he becomes, of course, a very, very great practitioner, and his yogas, the 8 Dharmas of Naropa are the main yogic tradition which was carried into Tibet. So anyway, then Naropa had many, many disciples again, but one of his most, for the Kagyu lineage, the most important was somebody called Marpa, who was a married lama. He was a scholar, a Lotsa, a translator. He knew Sanskrit very well. And so he went also to India and studied with Naropa and others, and then brought what he learned back into Tibet, and then he translated it into Tibetan from the Sanskrit. And again, Marpa had many, many disciples, but his most famous disciple by far was the great Tibetan yogi Milarepa, who in his earlier life, through black magic, had killed about 39 people, and then repented very much. So Marpa recognized that, you know, in order for Milarepa, who had such great potential, to really be able to follow the path, he had to clear up a lot of this very negative karma very quickly. So therefore he very famously got him building all these kind of towers single-handedly, and then arguing with him that that's not what he wanted at all, and making him demolish them and start another one somewhere else, and so forth. So he was very mean to Milarepa out of great compassion. And of course, eventually Milarepa went off and lived in caves and practiced very assiduously, and became the hallmark for Tibetans of a great yogi. He's like exemplification of that kind of very totally renounced yogic life. And of course, he also was gifted with a very beautiful singing voice, and he would sing his songs of realization, which were later written down and become very, very part of the Tibetan identity. In fact, just recently, the new translation of the 100,000 Songs of Milarepa have been published. I haven't seen it, but people say it's very good. The earlier one was nice, but it wasn't too accurate. Anyway, now Gampopa. Gampopa was born in 1070, right? And he was very bright young man, and he studied as a doctor. When he was 16, he married, and in time they had a child, and he was very well known as a very good physician. Then his wife and child caught some epidemic, and the child died, and then the wife also was on the point of death, but she wouldn't die. And so Gampopa, he said Gampo because he was born near Gampo, place called Dakpo. He asked, you know, why are you hanging on? You're in so much pain and you won't let go. And she said, well, it's because, you know, I really love you so much, and I can't bear the thought that after I'm gone, you're going to get married again. So he said that he promised that he would not marry again, and that he would become a monk. And so then she died. So then he did become a monk. Now, in the 11th century, a very great Bengali Pandit went to Tibet, who had an enormous influence on Tibetan Buddhism. His name was Dipankara Atisha. He was from what is nowadays in Bangladesh. But he was a very extraordinary being. I used to think he was kind of boring because he was so good. But actually, he was an extraordinary person. Anyway, he was told to go to Tibet by Tara. And there's a whole story of why he did go. But when he went, he really emphasized very much. Tantra, as many of you know, being Indian, can go either way. It can be a great path for liberation, or it can become something really very dark. And so I know that in India, mostly if you say Tantra, people, you know, if you say someone's a Tantric master, then people are immediately, you know, on their guard. Because the Tantra, which gains great power, you know, it has the idea of getting power, and of course power can go either way. Power can be for goodness or for evil. And so a lot of the emphasis became more on getting power, to get money, to get things you want, for harming people, and so forth. It can become very dark. And Buddhist Tantras likewise can go either way. And so when Atisha went to Tibet, I think he saw this, that it was getting quite degenerate. And so he emphasized very, very much the importance of bodhicitta, meaning that compassionate attitude which is desiring spiritual understanding for the sake of benefiting others, not for the sake of gaining power, not for the sake of one's own self-aggrandizement, but in order to be able to be of benefit for others. So the vow to attain enlightenment for the sake of all beings. And so he emphasized this, plus refuge in Buddha Dharma Sangha. He was called the Refuge Lama because he emphasized so much, you have to take refuge from your heart. And have the intention, why do we want to do these practices? Why are we on the path? It's not in order merely to benefit ourselves or to gain, you know, control. It's in order that we may arouse our innate wisdom, compassion, mind, and throughout time and space be of benefit for others. So he emphasized this again and again and again and again and again. And this then permeated all of Tibetan Buddhism. All the lineages then took that up, and his teachings. And it kept it clean. You know, it kept it on the path. The first thing we have to remember is bodhicitta, refuge, all the sufferings of samsara, and so forth. I mean, it kept it very pure. So, he started a tradition called Kadampa. And Gampopa became a Kadampa monk. And he, in fact, apparently studied under one of the main students of Atisha himself. By that time, probably Atisha had died, but he studied under one of his two of his main students called Sharawa and Potawa. And because he was very, very clever, he studied very well and he understood very well. And then he also did a lot of meditation. And, you know, again, got good results. But at the end, after some years, he still felt something was missing. And so he didn't quite know what was missing, but he felt that he hadn't yet completely got everything. So he was wandering around, and then he overheard three beggars who were discussing about if they had a wish-fulfilling gem, what they would want. And I don't remember the story. One of them wished to have lots of food, and the other one said, no, that's really stupid. You should ask for something else. I'm sorry, hopeless, can't remember the story. But the third one anyway said, well, what I would really like is to meet with Jetsunma. And all these beggars were actually emanations of Milarepa, who had got there just in order to tweak Gampopa's interest. But as soon as he heard the name Milarepa, then he knew that's who he had to meet. So he went around trying to find Milarepa. And then he met a woman who said, oh yes, Milarepa's been saying that you're coming. He's waiting for you. So then Gampopa felt, oh right, well, yeah, there you go. You know, and he felt quite pleased with himself. So then Milarepa caught that thought in his mind, so then he refused to see him. And he kept him waiting for a week before he would finally see him in order to lower his pride. But when Gampopa finally met Milarepa, then he offered him tea and he offered him gold. And Milarepa said, this is totally useless. I don't have any stove or pot on which to make any tea. And what am I going to do with your gold? For me, the whole world is gold. And he just threw it out. But nonetheless, he accepted Gampopa. And he told everybody, this is my chosen disciple. And so he taught Gampopa, especially the 6 yogas of Naropa and the Mahamudra teachings. And then, now, Gampopa was not actually with Milarepa so very long, compared with like Rechongpa and other students who've been with him for years and years. But he was already such a well-formed being. You know, he had done all this study and practice before, that he didn't need to stay with Milarepa all that long. He was like a pot which was all clean and ready. So Milarepa could just pour in the teachings, and he didn't have to first scour it all out or anything like that. It was all ready for him. So then he gave Gampopa all the teachings and along with predictions that he would carry on the lineage. And so then Gampopa went away and he meditated in various caves for about 12 years. And then he wanted to go back, and anyway, he went back, and Milarepa had died by this time. And so then he went to, he founded monasteries, and he brought together the monastic side and the yogic side. Up until then, all the adherents of the Kagyu had been yogis or householders like Marpa. And Gampopa was the one who brought along the monastic part. I mean, one can see it in our lineage. In our yogini lineage, there are 2 women. And then after Gampopa, there are no more women in the lineage, that's it. After that, it's all monks. But we don't blame Gampopa too much. So anyway, so the Kagyu lineage has this, is a blending of the monastic, the yogic, and the household lineages depending up until the present day. But Gampopa, therefore, he brought in the Kadampa. So therefore, the Kagyu lineage is a mixture of, a merger of the Kadampa view along with the yogic tradition of Tilopa, Naropa, Marpa, and Mila. And Gampopa then had many, many disciples, but his 2 main disciples, one was Dusen Chenpa, who is the first Karmapa, and the other was someone called Palmo. And from him stemmed many of the other Kagyu lineages. For example, one of his students was Jetsunma, who was a Drikung Kagyu, and then Lingchen Repa, whose disciples Ampidhyari formed the Drukpa Kagyu, and so forth. So, and the Talung Kagyu, and many of the other Kagyu schools, they all stem from Gampopa. So it's called the Dakpo Kagyu, because he was from Dakpo. He's called Dakpo Hlaje, the physician from Dakpo. So he wrote a very influential book, the Dakpo Tajien, which is translated into English as the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, in which he set out the stages on the path from a Kagyu point of view, mostly philosophically, not the yogic side of it. But he also did these 4 lines, which have come down to us. So these 4 lines say, then he died in 1153, so he lived quite long. And as I say, he had many students, and they spread out and formed their own lineages, some of which are still extant today, many of which died out in time. Because especially with the yogic lineages, unless you have a monastery to carry it on, it doesn't, it doesn't last. I think this is one of the reasons why Milarepa saw that it was more important to hand the lineage on to Gampopa than, say, to Jetsunma or Shevareta or any of his other students who just were living up in caves. Because Gampopa then went back, he wrote books, he founded monasteries, and he made a firm lineage which could be carried on. So for that reason, even though, Milarepa had students who had been with him 30, 40 years, he handed it on to this relative newcomer, because he could see that he would be the one who was in a position to actually hold the lineage. Anyway, so Gampopa, he wrote many books, several books, but the most famous are the Jewel Ornament and this, and a precious garland of the Supreme Path is also very important. But this is just a very small, short thing here, in which he says, grant your blessings that my mind may follow the Dharma, grant your blessings that my Dharma practice may become the path, grant blessings that the path may clarify confusion, and grant blessings that confusion may arise as wisdom. So these are the ones which we will go through. So the first one in Tibetan says, Lu Chusudro Chinjilo Tuso. Lo means the mind. Chusudroa means go towards the Dharma. Chinjilo means bless. So, the most important thing is that our mind should turn towards the Dharma. In other words, we may have all the other outer causes and conditions for practice. But if we don't have an interest, then it doesn't help. For example, people living in Buddhist countries, like I just came back now from Burma, from Myanmar. And there are still many Buddhist countries in the world, or there are also countries which are not only Buddhist, but nonetheless Buddhism is readily available. So there is part of the culture. With Tibetans, we see that also. It's part of their culture. There are teachers. There are books and teachings being given in their language. And it's part of their identity to be Buddhist. So on one level, all the causes and conditions are there. But they're not interested. They don't see the importance of practicing. They identify themselves as Buddhist. And, they have a certain devotion. Devotion is there. But devotion to what? Many, certainly, you see it also among the Tibetans. If, they say, are you devoted to the 3 jewels? Well, what are the 3 jewels? And they probably don't know. They just know they're devoted to that. And so this is a great weakness in the Dharma, the way it's presented, is that, many people, especially lay people, but also monks sometimes, their devotion is there and their sense of identity is there with the Buddha Dharma. But when it actually comes to understanding what it is or how to practice, they just, not only is there ignorance, but there's not really the incentive to know more. Because, of course, they could always go and ask or attend teachings. But that inherent interest and even this feeling that they need to know, it would help to know, it's not there. So, therefore, even if all the other causes and conditions are present, if the mind does not turn towards the Dharma, then there's no way to even get started. So, therefore, usually they start by talking about how to get together all the outer conditions, the appreciation of what we have already, in order to get people to recognize how rare and precious the opportunity is. Because especially if people are born in a Buddhist country, for example, then they cannot see that as being rare and privileged, because everybody's there, a big deal, right? And many people, their idea of, getting ahead is more likely to leave that environment and go somewhere else. So it's hard for us to appreciate something when it's a given for us. So therefore it's important to appreciate what we already have, so that we don't just start taking it for granted. Many people think, in Buddhist countries especially, that if you go to the temple, which people do, they go to the temple and they make offerings and they do prostrations, and maybe if they know a few prayer chants, they do some chanting. And so that idea that they're practicing. But who knows where the mind is? The mind might be running around all over the place, while externally our body is doing what it's meant to be doing. We're all prostrating nicely and sitting there reverentially and chanting all the right sort of prayers we've memorized. But what is the mind doing? The mind might be filled with, oh, I wonder, how long this is going on, what we're going to have for lunch. Or, annoyed because the person next to you isn't doing it properly, or because, you had an argument with somebody at breakfast, or, jealous because somebody's wearing something so much nicer than what we're wearing, and so forth. The point is that our minds can be very distracted with all sorts of negative emotions, while at the same time, externally, it all looks very nice. So this is, again, our mind is not going towards the Dharma. It's a matter of taking whatever we do and through our awareness, making it into a Dharma activity. Because this is really very important. If our minds really slot into understanding and awareness and an open, kind heart, then whatever we are doing becomes a Dharma practice. But if we are just letting our mind go wild and not taking control of our negative emotions and trying to transform them into positive emotions, then whatever we do externally, it's not going towards the Dharma. Do you understand? Am I making myself clear? It all depends on the mind. It all depends on how we are able to observe and deal skillfully with the negative emotions such as our greed and aggression, aversion, and our jealousies and prides, and our basic dullness, our basic unknowing, that we don't see things clearly how they really are. And everything is from the point of view of me and mine. Everything is me, 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 me. Then, whatever we do, it doesn't go towards the Dharma. Our main problem is what in Tibetan is called Dazin, which literally means to grasp at a self. Now this does not mean, Buddhism is always, well I should talk about this later, but it's important to recognize that when we're talking about no self, it doesn't mean we don't exist. It just means that we identify with the wrong parts of ourselves. We identify with the surface conceptual thinking mind, like the waves on the top of the ocean, going up and down, and we think this is me. Whereas we don't know that, if you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into the ocean, there is something very different underlying it all, which is nonetheless water, just as the surface waves are water, but it's a very different kind of water. We'll deal with that later when we come into confusion and wisdom. But it's very important to, especially with our Dharma practices, that we really from the heart look to see what is the underlying motivation for what we are doing. So, but in the meantime, with this mind going, the traditional explanations are to do with what are called the four contemplations, which is the preciousness of a human body, impermanence and death, karma and its results, and the miserable state of samsara. Right? So we will do with that. So traditionally, again, when it talks about the preciousness of a human birth, there is talk of the 8 freedoms, I think, and 10 endowments. Samsara by its very nature is a problem. Samsara, this round birth and death, endlessly coming into birth, living, dying, coming back, living, dying, coming back, living, dying, endlessly, 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 creating at the same time through our actions of body, speech, and mind, so much karma. It's a problem. And therefore, it is important to appreciate that, despite the fact that living in this world is a problem, there are always going to be something wrong. We have so much, and we are so fortunate. We are very fortunate to be here. And in order to recognize this, they come up with all these ideas. Like we have, first of all, the 8 freedoms, the 8 things we don't have to worry about, right? We are not born in the lower realms, right? We are not born in the hell realms, or as hungry ghosts, or as spirit realms, or as animals. Animals can be very sweet, but they don't have the ability to understand and recognize the past. They might have very good natures. Many animals are really very, very loving natures. But still they don't have that unique intelligence, which as human beings we do have, which allows us to comprehend abstract ideas and to really recognize. Of course, animals, hell-bound beings, spirits, insects, fish, all of us have what is called Buddha nature. All of us have the potential for awakening, but it's usually considered it's only in the human realm that we actually can actualize that potential. We'll talk about that later. But this is what makes the human realm so unique. We are also not born among the gods, the Deva realms, because it's considered the Deva lock being so very pleasurable. There's not usually the incentive to practice. The lower realms, like the hell realms and the spirit realms, etc., are so miserable that people are trapped in their paranoia and they don't have the time or the leisure to devote themselves to a spiritual path. On the other hand, the Devas are having such a good time that they don't see any reason to, apply themselves to spiritual practice. A little bit is not true. I mean, some Devas actually do practice very hard. And even at the time of the Buddha, many times it says in the sutras how the Jeta grove was lit up by the light of the Devas who were coming to ask the Buddha for advice. And so in actual fact, some levels of Devas do practice. But on the whole, because it is such a pleasurable state, you have a body of light. So no sickness, no aging, no hunger, no thirst. Everything is very, very pleasant. So then why bother? The people, it's like in the world, people who are super rich and can have everything they want, any time, any place. The incentive to change inwardly is simply not there. So it's actually a disadvantage to have things too easy, just as it's a disadvantage to have things too difficult. It distracts from the central point. So therefore, again, a human life with its balance of difficulties and pleasures is considered the best possible birth to have. So, or to be born in a place where there isn't any Dharma, where Dharma does not exist. Even the word Buddha does not exist. I mean, for a time this was in India for about 1,000 years, where Buddhism completely died out. But now Buddhism is revived here again. But in many Middle Eastern countries, even if you were interested in Buddhism, you would not be allowed to practice. And you could be born in all sorts of places where there's no education, where life is very difficult, very hard, you're just trying to struggle just to exist. I mean, there's still many, many places in the world like that, including India. And so then, because life is so difficult, or because Buddhism is not known in those areas, then again, from a spiritual point of view, from a Buddhist point of view, it would be considered to be, again, a very unfortunate rebirth. Oops, sorry. Or if you, for example, I'm just reading now, again, the life of Helen Keller. She was a woman in the last century who was, when she was a baby, she had some disease, probably meningitis or something, and as a result she became blind and deaf. And to be blind is a disadvantage, but to be deaf as well as blind means you're completely cut off. You can't hear anything, and you can't see anything. So how to relate when you don't hear language? And you know, if it starts early enough, you have no idea of what the world outside might be like, because you can't hear it, you can't see it. And of course she became very well known because one woman who also was almost blind became her teacher and taught her how to, eventually how to speak even. And she went all around the world giving talks, and she wrote books, and she was an extraordinary woman. I mean, the two of them together were just unbelievable what they did. Coming from this world of complete darkness in which she would just have incredible temper tantrums and was completely out of control because she was locked in this darkness, total unknowing. And then how gradually she came out of that and became an extraordinary inspiration for millions of people. Anyway, it's considered to be, again, a disadvantage if you, in some way, your senses are impaired, especially nowadays. Of course, there are schools for teaching, but in the old days there were not. And so if you were blind, or even if you were deaf, usually you ended up mute because you couldn't hear enough to be able to make intelligible sounds. So that was an incredible disadvantage again. So if we have all our senses, we can see, we can hear. I mean, that's extraordinary if you think about it. You know, we take all these things for granted, but in fact, they're amazing. Which means we can hear the Dharma in this context, we can read books. We're all educated. Imagine that. I mean, even today in the world, for women to be highly educated is still often not possible. So the fact that we can take a book, and if it's in a language we understand, we can open it and read it and understand it. It's extraordinary. We shouldn't take it for granted. I mean, even today, even if people can manage to read, they often don't know what they're reading. They can say the words, but don't know what it means. So this is also an incredible thing, to be educated. You can think. We shouldn't take this for granted. I think it's not important. Still very privileged. And then, of course, there are times we're looking at this huge cosmic cycle, not just this lifetime, and there are times when there is no Buddha. And if there's no Buddha, then there's no Buddha Dharma, there's no teaching. I mean, there are whole vast cycles of time. I mean, for example, this Buddha, Sakyamuni, he only came 2,500 years ago. That's a finger snap in cosmic time. And so before that, there was no Buddha Dharma. And in the future, when it dies out, there won't be Buddha Dharma again. But right now, there is. Even though he died 2,500 years ago, it doesn't matter. There are still so many books, so many teachers, so many lineages which are still alive. So no excuse. And then, we are not born in a place where people, India is a very interesting country, as we all know. And one of them is because it has, it's so open to diverse philosophical views, religious views. I mean, it has everybody in it. I love the fact that as it's a secular constitution, therefore you keep all the religious holidays. Right? So everybody, you name it, they've got their holiday there. It's an excuse for all the government workers to have a day off. But you know, everybody is celebrated. And I mean, and that in itself is extraordinary because, as we know, there are still countries in the world which are very heavily fundamentalist towards whatever their belief is, and they do not allow any other view. I mean, even today, as we know, there are countries which, you know, you are not allowed to believe anything other than what is the stated view of that country. And so there's no freedom. But India does have tremendous religious freedom, and may it always have, really, truly. It's one of the signs of its greatness. It's that you can believe anything you want, and provided it doesn't harm others, you're free to go ahead and not only believe, but you can build your temple or your mosque or your church or your whatever. I mean, when the Tibetans came, I mean, first of all, imagine, no other country allowed the Tibetan refugees in. Even Bhutan, which is a Buddhist country, and Burma, which is a Buddhist country, they would not allow the refugees in. The only country which opened its borders and brought everybody in was India. Good for India, really. I mean, India, with all its overpopulation and all its problems, and its poverty and its social problems, they just opened their doors and allowed them all in. And not just that, when they came in, then they found places for them to stay, they gave them aid, they gave them sustenance, they allowed them to build their schools with their own curriculum, they allowed them to carve their mantras all over the rocks and stick their prayer flags up wherever they felt like it, and to build their temples in whatever shape they felt like. And they were just, I mean, I think India is just wonderful. You know, that openness of heart and that welcoming of these people and allowing them to be who they were, and not forcing them to do who they weren't. So in their Tibetan schools, they learn Tibetan. And really, this is something which everybody should feel proud of, because all the surrounding countries were not like that. And it's something which is very, very, I don't know, it's very profound in India. I mean, India, we all know, has many, many problems, as every other country in the world does. But it also has a certain greatness to it throughout its history, which is that it's always given birth to many great religions and sustained religions coming from other areas, and, you know, given the freedom for people to practice what they wish and to believe what they wish. And, you know, of course, from time to time the politicians have gotten in there and created problems, but in general, there is such an openness of respect for all religious and spiritual approaches, that provided they are, you know, basically good and kind and not in any way seeking to harm others, then everybody respects them. I mean, just like in the times of India and others where, you know, along with all the reporting on rapes and murders and corruption charges, there's that little speaking tree. Right? This little voice of sanity in the midst of all samsaric nonsense. You know, I don't know, I can't imagine in the Daily Mirror they'd do that. And or anybody, you know, any spiritual path. You know, Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, Jain, Osho, Christian. I mean, anybody who's speaking sanity can be in there. To my mind, that really sums up India. you know, along with all the other stuff. There's that essential knowing that there is something else. In the midst of it all, there's light. Anyway, so the fact that we are not born in the lower realms, that we are born at a time when the Dharma and spiritual truths are still being propagated, that we have the ability to understand, that we have, physically we are not impaired, and so forth. And then, along with that, we're humans, which means that we have the intelligence to understand and to practice. As we say, in other forms of being, they might have very good hearts and good natures, but they don't have that inherent intelligence which human beings have. So, we're humans, that's the first upside. Secondly, we're in a country, in a situation where the Dharma is alive. And so this is, you can read books, you can listen to teachers, you can download from the internet, it's all there. And you're not going to be arrested for doing so. You can do that. And then again, that we are relatively healthy, and we have all our sense faculties, we have the intelligence to begin to able to understand and comprehend and to think about things, and that we have not committed anything really, really horrible, like killing our father and mother, killing an arahat, and so forth, we assume. So, whatever wrongdoing we have accomplished for ourselves, it's not that bad. And it can all be purified. So that's not too bad. It doesn't stand as an obstacle. And then, you leave that to the end. Then, so we're here at a time when Buddha Dharma is still around, and there is people who can teach. There are people who support Dharma activities, benefactors. But most important is we have some interest. Because if you didn't have an interest, you wouldn't waste your Saturday coming here. Okay? So we have created the causes and conditions. It's not just arbitrary. It's not just, oh, well, it just happened, my friend was going, so I came along. We meet with the Dharma because we ourselves at some time, in this lifetime or past lifetimes, have created the causes and conditions to so do. Without that, it wouldn't happen. So, the most important cause and condition is interest. If we are not interested, then all the other causes and conditions can come together, but it's not going to help. So the most important thing is an interest in spiritual training. And that's why the first line says that our grant blessings, give this strength, this power, that my mind may turn towards the Dharma, may practice the Dharma. Because if otherwise, everything else can come together, it doesn't help. I mean, sometimes, one time I was in Delhi, and our taxi driver said to us, the Dalai Lama's in town. And we said, oh, right. So we called up Tibet House, and they said, oh yes, actually he's giving a talk right now at this youth center for Tibetan hostel. So we went to this hostel, and it had a kind of auditorium, a theater. And there was His Holiness, and then in front of him were these Korean monks and nuns who had come from Korea for teaching. And then a few people in the audience, not that many, a few older Tibetans. And then outside were hundreds of young Tibetan boys and girls, young adolescents, who were sitting on the wall outside, swirling their white scarves, their katas, and chatting among themselves, and waiting for His Holiness to come out and walk past and bang them on the head. Now, they were Tibetans. His Holiness was speaking in their language. They didn't need a translation. He was talking about their religion. In fact, he was talking about the 3rd chapter of Shantideva. So it wasn't that obscure. But they had no interest. They had all the causes and conditions. The theatre was almost empty. It was their theatre even, in their hostel. Their religion, their leader, who they all were very devoted to themselves. Their culture, their everything. These people from Korea had come all the way from Korea and had to listen with a translation. They didn't need a translation. But that essential ingredient of actual interest was not there. So then all the other causes and conditions could come together, but it didn't add up to anything. So this is the point. I mean, like other people, even all the other causes and conditions don't always come together. They have to work for it. But the essential ingredient, which is that wanting the mind to go towards, to turn towards the Dharma. That, if you have that, then one can get together all the others. You know, like you can come all the way to India, or you can go find somehow some teacher, or you can read books, or you can get the other conditions together. If the essential condition of really wanting to make the mind one with the Dharma, if that is there, then one can work at the others. But even if we have all the others, but we don't have that essential ingredient, it doesn't work. So this is why Gampopa puts it at the top. Because if we don't have an interest, then it's not going to work. It's like that final ingredient. You know, it's like if you have, you know, you have flour, you have water, you have salt, you have the oven with the heat, you've been kneading, but you don't have the dough, you don't have the yeast, right? That little piece of yeast mixed in with the dough, then it's not going to rise. We have everything else, right? We have the flour and the water and the oven and the bowls and everything and the know-how. But we're lacking that one ingredient, which is going to turn it all into bread. And so this is why the Gampopa puts it at the beginning, because without that, nothing is going to transform. I mean, even if we go through all the motions of doing all our prostrations, going to the temple, doing prayers, saying mantras, and so forth, but if our mind hasn't merged with the Dharma, if it's not one with what we're doing, then it doesn't work. So that's the most important thing we can do, is to really see, are we really interested? Do we really want to blend our mind with the Dharma or not? Because that's the crucial point. And so this is why they go through all this stuff about, recognizing the uniqueness of our time. I mean, they have this this you know, we're supposed to appreciate how very fortunate we are at this moment to be born humans in the condition which we have, with all these causes and conditions, all these freedoms and endowments, and not to waste it. Because if we waste it, then it's very, very difficult to get it back again. It's not something we should take for granted. So the traditional analogy, of course, is of a big ocean, and there's this like a tire floating around in the ocean, and at the bottom of the ocean there's a one-eyed turtle who goes to the surface every 100 years, and meantime the tire or the yoke is wandering around on the surface of the ocean, blown in any direction, and the likelihood that that turtle, which only arises every 100 years, will break the surface and put its head through the tire, is more likely than that if we waste this precious human birth, that we will gain such a situation again with all these causes and conditions in place. So the idea is to really make us appreciate that what we have right now is not just something which came by chance. It's something which we ourselves have worked at for lifetimes to create the causes and conditions in which we find ourselves now. And if we waste this and get distracted, then all these causes and conditions, millions of causes and conditions, are going to come together like that again. It's very hard for them all to slot into place so that suddenly it all comes together. So therefore it's considered very important not to waste this opportunity, and to make the most of it while we've got it. So now maybe we can just sit for 5 minutes while you've just been standing up so your legs are okay again. So please just, the important thing is just to keep, if you are sitting on chairs, and keep your feet on the ground if you can. And if you're on the floor, then for both, keep the back as straight as you can, but relax, not tense. This is just to get our mind calm and back in the room again, right? So we just sit quietly. You can keep the eyes open or close them gently. And just get a sense of being in this room. We're perfectly safe. Nothing horrible is happening here at this moment. Everything is perfectly quiet. No harm. So we're in this room, and we're in our bodies. And just experience the body from the top of the head down through our face. Relax. Relax all the muscles of the face. Relax the shoulders, the arms, the trunk, the belly. Relax our legs. Just feel the body. the sensations in the body. And then the temptations of the breathing in and the breathing out. We're always breathing in and breathing out. Normally we are not conscious of that. Now we know it. That's all we have to do. Breathe in, breathe out. In and out. And just follow the breath. Sounds are just sounds. Thoughts are just thoughts playing in the background. Not important. The only thing that matters is that we are sitting and breathing and knowing that we are breathing. So just for a few minutes, just sit like that. So the next of these four contemplations, after the appreciation of our precious human birth, all human birth is not precious. It has to have these conditions, you know, for example, that which we went through before, that we are, you know, in a place where the Dharma is present and it's still being practiced, and that there are teachers, and that we have the intelligence to be able to follow the path, and especially that we have the interest to want to follow the path. So when all those conditions come together, then we have the freedom that we're allowed to follow the path, because some people even may want to, but they cannot. They don't have the external circumstances to allow them to study and practice. But when all these conditions come together, then it is considered very rare, if you consider all the billions of people in the world, how few have all these causes and conditions. and that it's not only rare, but therefore very, very precious. It's something that we shouldn't just disregard just because maybe we have lots of friends who are also in the same condition, that we think it's something very common, but actually it is not common, and therefore we should be very careful to create the conditions for it happening again in the future, that we don't lose this opportunity, because as I said, if we lose the opportunity, it's not likely to come again, especially in this world where the chances for leading a genuine spiritual life are getting less and less as our distractions get more and more. So the next quality to consider is that of impermanence and death. Because it's something that people don't normally like to think about. We are all looking for security, and that when at least we meet with favorable conditions, that they will last forever. And we don't like to think that actually everything is changing moment to moment to moment. Our lives are like a river. We may go and look at the river one day and then go back the next day or the next year or the next 10 years, looks like the same river. But of course, every single drop in that river has changed and is changing moment to moment to moment. It looks like the same, but it's not the same at all. And likewise with our bodies are constantly replenishing and decaying, the cells come into being and then they die away and are replaced by other cells. And we look at each other and we think we're more or less the same, maybe a few more sagging muscles and wrinkles and grey hairs, but essentially the same. But actually we are being replaced continually. This is just the body, what to speak of the mind. Moment to moment to moment, thoughts are rising and disappearing again. It's like, you go to the ocean, there's the waves, they come up and then they recede, and then they come up and they recede, and you think, oh, just waves. But each wave is completely different to the wave before, full of different droplets of water. So likewise with us, we are moment to moment to moment to moment changing. And within that, we hope that things are going to stay the same. What a hope. Change is the name of the game. I mean, and the point, that we want security. We want the feeling that, especially when circumstances are good and advantageous, that it's always going to be like that, but it's never going to stay the same. How can it? Everything which happens to us, or almost everything which happens to us, is the result of conditions which we ourselves created in the past, which is like karma. And our karmas are changing constantly. So externally, also things are changing constantly. And the thing is to feel secure within that insecurity. Then that's the real security. When we are willing, like a surfboard, to ride with the waves, rather than to try to stop the waves. Because then, whatever happens, we'll deal with it. Rather than trying to, I don't know, we see it all the time. I mean, that people try to block the flow. But we cannot. And we should not. Because change, apart from being a part of nature, is how we learn. If everything was always static and the same, then we wouldn't learn anything, we wouldn't progress. We have to allow things to flow. And at the end, we die. Big deal. It's very interesting. You know, in Buddhism, the four problems, the four sufferings are birth, and then old age, sickness, and death. But birth is included. Now, normally, when birth comes, apart from the poor mother, and of course, we must remember the baby's first reaction is to cry. It doesn't laugh. But people forget that bit. You know, and they regard birth as being a happy occasion. But in Buddhism, it's also the first of the sufferings. Not only from the pain of the mother and the suffering of the child being forced through the birth canal, but also because once you're born, then you're going to get old age and sick and die. If you hadn't been born, you wouldn't have to go through all that. So it's considered part of the problem. You know, we wouldn't die if we didn't get born. And we wouldn't get born if we didn't die. Right? So it's part of the same cycle. And to accept that everything is impermanent, everything is changing. Things are like they are now, but anytime they can change. They're all contingent on so many causes and conditions which can change at any time. And we have to open ourselves to that. Even if changes might seem, sometimes changes are good changes, right? I mean, you know, lots of changes that happen in our life we see it as being for the best. I mean, everything doesn't always go down, it also goes up. But also, even if changes are changes which we resist, the pain comes from the resistance. If we just opened ourselves to accept whatever is happening as happening, we wouldn't suffer. The Buddha said our suffering comes from our grasping mind, our clinging. We cling to things, we cling to people, we cling to circumstances. And when that changes, then we suffer. If we weren't clinging, and if we just opened up and accepted whatever is happening as it's happening, we wouldn't suffer. The suffering is not usually from the outside, the suffering is our response from the inside. And this is why certainly in certain Buddhist schools, for the Vipassana schools, etc., there is tremendous emphasis on focusing on the transitory nature in our body, in our sensations of the body, and in our mind, how moment to moment to moment the mind is flowing. So they zero in on that in order for us to recognize even very subtle impermanence. Because if we actually recognize it, apart from then realizing, well, where's the self in all this, it gives actually, ironically, a great sense of freedom. It's the nature of things to be impermanent. Why am I resisting? Then there is that sense of inner security. Because whatever happens, there is an inner relaxation. It's okay. How to deal skillfully with whatever is happening in this moment. So, when the Buddha talked, you know, he spoke a lot about dukkha, you know, the suffering or the unsatisfactoriness, the dis-ease of our ordinary existence. because we grasp and cling when everything is impermanent, we can't accept that everything is impermanent, and therefore we suffer. And especially this sense of a self as being something solid, real, self-existent, maneuvering everything behind the scenes, which once we recognize how things really work, we can see it doesn't exist like that. It doesn't mean we don't exist at all, that we're not anything, but we're not who we think we are. And once we begin to actually recognize this, then there is this, as I say, an inner state of release and freedom. It's not like that at all. We don't need to grasp. You can't grasp at water that's flowing. It's like trying to catch the river, you know, you can't do that. If you dam it up, something, it becomes it becomes stagnant. So this sense of accepting and feeling at ease within change is very important, because then we're not threatened by it. It's something which we can make use of, we can learn from. We're here to learn. We're not really here just to have a good time. Everything which happens, what can I learn from this? What is this teaching me? How to respond skillfully to the challenges that life brings up. So this recognition of the impermanence, the fact that moment to moment things are changing is very important. In Buddha Dharma, it's one of the main points to recognize that, because ironically, you know, it sounds like if we think, oh, you know, samsara is you know, full of suffering and it's impermanent and there's no, you know, real essence to anything. It sounds terribly, terribly depressing. And so you wonder why when you go to Buddhist countries everybody's smiling. You know, but in fact, if you do go to Buddhist countries, you find that everybody's very at ease and happy and jolly. But the reason is because they have accepted that that's how it is, they don't expect anything else, and then they get on with life. And then it's fine. It's only not fine when we resist that. And when the Buddha said that life is unsatisfactory, he didn't mean that it's always miserable and gloomy. And he's always talking about joy. And in fact, he says at one point that this is a path of joy. If it were a path of misery, it would still be worth it for the result. You know, if it was a, you know, like when you do tapasya. If it was like that, still it would be worth it because the result is so good. But it's not. He said it's a path of joy, you know, inner freedom. So all the more reason to practice. And so, you know, I mean, all the Buddhas are smiling, right? They're not agonized, they're not looking depressed. You know, they're all smiling happily. Why? Because they recognize this is the way things are, but it's okay. If we understand it, then it's perfectly all right that it's like that, because that's the way it is. And likewise, with impermanence comes death. And death is perfectly okay too. I mean, even, as you know, I mean, nowadays in the West, you know, people talk about anything under the sun, which they normally never used to talk about. But the one thing they don't talk about is death. It's the last great taboo. And especially in hospitals. I mean, everyone's in a state of denial. Especially doctors. And this is very sad. Because actually, the one thing certain about life is death. We don't know anything else about life. We could be dead in the next moment. People have heart attacks and all sorts of things can happen. We can't say that we're going to be alive in 5 minutes' time. We don't know. But for sure that every single person here is going to die, that we know. And all the people that we love and hold dear, they're also going to die, that we know. And it's okay, so what? I was brought up as a spiritualist. That means in my home, every week we had meetings with our neighbors and we had seances, so we would call up spirits and talk to them. And I'm very grateful for this. One thing, because it meant that death was an everyday subject of joyful conversation. It was not the no word, that which must not be spoken of. My mother had lots of books on what happened after you died, and it was a subject which we often discussed and speculated on. And so I'm very grateful for that. I'm also grateful because it made me very aware of the many realms of being around us which we can't see, but which nonetheless are coexistent with ourselves. And so being brought up with the idea of various spirit realms and so forth, I'm very grateful for that, actually. And I was always surprised later to discover that other people were not using death as an everyday interesting subject of conversation. And in fact that they resisted the idea, even the word. You passed over. You went into the long sleep. And so forth. But you didn't die. But we do die. And in Tibetan Buddhism especially, they have made a great science of dying. It's one of the things which attracts people nowadays to Tibetan Buddhism, is the fact that they have really made it into a science of the stages towards death, and then the time of death, and then what happens afterwards, with all the advice on what to do and how to use that as an incredible opportunity to make a great leap forward if one is prepared. Of course, at the time of death, if you've never done anything before, it's too late. But if one has done practices, then at the time of death, that's when one can really grasp that great opportunity to make a big leap forward. So this is also, nowadays, even in the West, a lot of investigation into the Tibetan methods, because you see it when people die. I mean, when great practitioners die, the extraordinary phenomena that happens at that time, including, of course, going into meditation states for many days or weeks, or the body shrinking, and rainbows, and relics, and all sorts of things happen. So at the time of death is the time that they regard as being when the practitioner, however modest they may have been about their practice during their life, finally, is revealed, where they were at. And I mean, not just Tibetans, but also, anybody who is practicing it can die with very extraordinary signs at the time of death. So death can be a very useful time. If one knows how to use it, it can be a very, a supercharged time for making a lot of progress on the spiritual path if one is prepared. But even if one is not prepared, it's very important, if people are dying, not to trouble them. Like, don't leave us, how can you leave me? It's the worst thing you could possibly do. Please don't do that. If anybody that your parents or your partners, even your, should happen your children, heaven help, or anybody that you care about, or even if you don't care about, the thing is not to disturb them and to encourage them in whatever is their particular belief system, to remind them of that in a very gentle way, whatever they have faith in, to bring that to their mind, and not in any way to disturb them by asking them not to leave. Encourage them to leave if they are about to, if it's time for them to pass on, and just say, we love you and thank you very much for being with us, and now, you're free to go on. It's okay now. And not to create a disturbance for their mind, because it's a very important time for them to be focused on, going forward, especially if they have any particular spiritual beliefs, like if they're very strong Hindus, Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, whatever they are, to tell them to call to mind their object of devotion at that time. If they're not interested in anything in particular, and just tell them to think of the light. And not disturb them with any kind of mundane concerns, or, making them feel bad about leaving. Because, I don't know, it's very, and also if it's possible, talk about it. How are you feeling? What are you thinking now? Is there anything, if you really they're really genuinely going to go, then ask them if they have any particular feelings about, the funerals, or what, what their prayers they would like done. Is there anybody that they would like you to contact on their behalf? People don't even talk about this, and yet for the person who's dying, it's the most important thing in the world, and yet everybody's in denial. It's like you've got an elephant in the room and you're talking about everything except the elephant. The one time I was in Australia, and this woman came to me and said her husband was dying, and could I please go and see him and ask him if he had any thoughts about his funeral, or any prayers he wanted done, and so forth. And I said, well, why don't you ask him? Oh, we can't speak about it. We can't mention that he's dying. So I had to go and see this poor man in hospital who looked like a skeleton. And I had never met him before, right? And so, I sat down, I took his hand, I said, how is he feeling? And then I said, look, when you die, do you have any thoughts about, what kind of funeral you would like, what kind of prayers you would like? And so, thank goodness someone's talking about it. He said, yes, I want this done and that done and da-da-da, and could they please recite such and such, and could you let so-and-so know? And, poor man. There he was. In fact, 2 days later he died. But, then his father and mother, they were saying, how could this happen to us? And I said, well, of course, worst thing for a parent is to lose a child first, but, it happens all the time. No, how could this happen for us? And so the hospital overlooked this main road. So I took them to the window, and thinking of the Buddha with the kisagotami and the mustard seed, I said, well, show me somebody walking down there who hasn't lost someone that they love. Just tell me somebody there who hasn't lost somebody. And I said, well, this happens to us all. All of us. We all lose people. We lose our parents, we lose our siblings, we lose our children, we lose our friends. Who doesn't? What makes us so unique that we are never going to lose anybody we love? And we have to accept this in the nature of the world. None of us live forever. I know so many people, their parents die and they're, 96, and the children are still amazed that they died. Isn't it? I mean, really. We have to accept that people are dying all the time, and it's natural. And especially if people have been sick, then it's good, because they can then have a chance to get a new body and start again. I mean, when the body gets to a point where it really doesn't want to function anymore, then leave it. Especially for Christians or Hindus or Buddhists or, Muslims who believe that there's something that comes after, then this resistance to allowing people to go. It's very strange. So we should not do that. We need to contemplate that we are impermanent, we are aging from the moment of being born, we are aging. And this is natural. And at a certain point, we drop it. When our karma runs out, then we go. Some people die in the womb, some people die at birth, when they're a few weeks, few months, few years. Some people mature, some people don't. Some people live very old, some people die very young. They always have, they always will. So we have to accept. This is the way it is. It's not bad. It's not good, it's not bad, it just is. And the best thing we can do is to prepare ourselves now, so that at the time of death, we can die without regret. We can die feeling, okay, I did the best for this life, to benefit myself, to benefit others. It's okay now, I can go. And if we have, if we did something really not good at all and we are feeling bad about ourselves, then let it go, for goodness sake. God. Human beings are really perverse. Everybody's done things which they regret. We've also done beautiful things. We've done good things, we've done not good things. Let it go. It's very important, especially at the time of death, to let go. Let go of all the things which we cling to. And many of the things we cling to are not just pleasurable things, like people we love and good things and so forth. That would be understandable that we would cling to those. But we cling to all the bad things. All our memories and our regrets and our guilt and people we didn't like who did bad things to us, or we did bad things to them. All the things which make us feel miserable and angry and upset, we cling. I mean, how stupid can you get? So let go. Let go of all our resentments, all our remorse, our guilt, as well as letting go of all our attachments. Just let go. And if we can do that during life too, that's even better. Hold things gently, and just let things flow. Don't go on. It's this clinging mind which causes suffering. We cling not only to what is pleasurable, but also to what is painful. Sometimes I say that the ego is very happy to be miserable. Because even if we are miserable, then we are thinking, oh, poor me. We are still very concerned with ourselves and how sad I am and how I am suffering. So it's, whether we're happy or miserable, it's still moved by this sense of me and mine. But, at least we can see that and begin to let go of being miserable. I mean, what's the point? So, impermanence, death. Once we accept that that's how it is, then it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. We get recycled. That's ecologically very sound. You throw in your plastic bottles and they come out as bricks. So likewise, we just recycle ourselves again, and we come up in all sorts of new and interesting forms. And we don't know what. Because the third contemplation is karma. So karma, as you know, means action. And in the Buddha said that karma is intention. That means it's not so much what we do, but the underlying motivation of why we did it. So, as a very obvious example, pushed to extremes. You could be a criminal who takes up a scalpel and intends to harm somebody. So then you plunge that scalpel into somebody's chest, to their heart, and as a result, they die. Or you could be a surgeon who likewise takes up the scalpel and is going to do a heart operation, so he plunges it into somebody's chest. Unfortunately, that person nonetheless dies. But their intention was to help. So the action, roughly, is the same, right? Cutting into somebody's chest. But the motivation behind it was completely different. One was the motivation to harm, the other was the motivation to help. So therefore the karmic result, even of that same action, would be very, very different. That's, it's extreme, but you understand, that's the point. The point is, it's not so much the actual action as the underlying intention behind it. Was it connected with the negative roots of hatred, anger, aversion, or greed and grasping and unknowing and pride, jealousy, all these negative emotions, or which could mask themselves as being a very nice action, but the underlying motive was not kind. Or it could be looking like a very negative emotion, but actually the underlying intention was to help. So we don't always know even, because we lie to ourselves very often about our intentions. And we plaster over and make it look nice when actually the underlying intention was not so good. But in general, without becoming too nitpicking about all this, the idea is that if our actions of body, speech, and mind are conjoined with positive roots, then it's a positive result. And if it's negative results, then it will be a negative result. But the point is that, okay, we have had, from a Buddhist perspective, we have had countless lifetimes in which we have done just about everything. Good, bad, and indifferent. And all that has planted seeds in what is called the store consciousness, the alaya vijnana. And we do not know when those seeds are going to come up. So we cannot say because somebody in this lifetime has an unfortunate rebirth or many problems or so and so, that means in their last lifetime they were bad people. Or because in this lifetime everything is flowing nicely, that means in last lifetime they were good people. Because there is such a mixture. And we don't know what's going to come up when. Which is why also, of course, bad things happen to good people. And good things happen to bad people. I mean, look who got president of the United States. So we don't know. And therefore we cannot judge others. And also, sometimes we might have a spell of very negative karma, and then it might change and become positive karma. The other point is that it's not always possible to know, from the point of our ego, what is positive and what is negative. Because sometimes when very difficulties are the very thing which make us more strong, more compassionate, more wise, and so forth. In which case, what looked like something negative might actually be something very positive in the end. So the important thing in karma, really to my mind, is not to wonder, what did I do last time that this is happening now? Because we don't know which lifetime it was happening in, and we don't know what's going to follow, because things change. The important thing is that whatever happens to us, how do we respond skillfully? That's the point. How can we make use of whatever it is that is happening in this moment? Then, if we respond skillfully, there's no good or bad. It just is. Ananda, the Buddha's cousin and his main attendant, he said one time to the Buddha, well, I think, karma is very complicated, but I think I got it. And Buddha said, no, Ananda, don't say that. Karma is beyond conceptual thinking. It is the province of thought of only a Buddha. Because we see such a small part, we don't see the total picture. It's like if we were weaving a tapestry, or making a carpet, and we only see the little part which we're weaving. We don't see all what happened before. If we could step back and see the total picture, then the part that we're weaving now would make sense, right? Even if it's dark threads, we would see they form part of the pattern. But because we can't see it, we only see such a small part. It often doesn't, we can't make sense of it. And so our ego judges it to be good if it's pleasant for us, or bad if we don't like it. But in fact, it's something much more vast than that. And so therefore the best that we can do is to accept whatever is happening and think how to respond, how to deal with this situation in a way which is skillful and useful, rather than just becoming, resisting or getting upset or getting angry or whatever. Because again, everything is changing moment to moment to moment. And our karma changes too. I mean, it's people who are high go low, people who are low go high. And you know, we just don't know what's going to happen to us. And so the only way to deal with that is really to be very open and spacious in accepting what happens and trying to develop this quality of awareness so that we are able to deal with whatever happens without getting overwhelmed. That, if we can do that, gives a sense of, as I say, of inner freedom. Then whatever happens, we'll deal with it. That's okay. But if we're always trying to manipulate everything to go the way I want it to go, then we are endlessly disappointed, frustrated, upset, and so forth, because things are going the way they're going to go. They don't care what we want. So, in Buddhism, of course, the teaching on karma is mostly to encourage us to try to create moment to moment to moment. We're eating up the past and we're creating the future, right? In this very moment, right? So everything which is happening to us is from the past, and then how we are responding is creating our future. So it starts. It's why it's so important also to become more conscious, more aware, so that we are creating seeds, good seeds, which are going to come up either in this lifetime or in future lifetimes. In this world, there are three ways of considering why things happen to us. Either, as in many religions, it is we were created by an entity outside of ourselves called God, and that being then is in charge not only of having created us, but then what happens to us subsequently. And at the end, we get given an exam, and we are judged on how we did during our time here, which seems a little unfair, because some people had a very hard time, some people had an easy time. Well, God is judging, and He knows. So that's the first scenario. And many, most almost, of the world's religions have that belief that we were created, and then most of what happens to us is the will of God, and then at the end we will be judged and sent up or down forever. Hinduism kind of goes halfway. I never can quite work out where they're going, because on the one hand they've got karma, and on the other hand they have all these creators. So how they reconcile the two, I don't know. But anyway, that's their problem. Or the other extreme is that there is no creator, there is no future life, there was no past life, we are here for this duration, and we should do the best we can with what we've got. And then when we die, that's the end. There is no consciousness going on. That, of course, is the secular materialistic view. And, of course, many great humanitarians are materialists. It doesn't mean that then everybody becomes extremely selfish. I mean, many of the great philanthropists of the world don't believe in a future life. This is the scientific point of view, that we are, even our brain, our consciousness is material. We may not be able to pick it up on all our machines yet, but in time the machines will get more sophisticated and they will finally discover what is consciousness. So this is the very prevalent materialistic view. It is even overtaking Buddhism in many circles. It's called secular Buddhism. In secular Buddhism, they deny past or future rebirths, and they also deny karma. And so again, their idea is that, in this lifetime one tries to be a good person, and meditation makes you feel better, and then when you die, that's the end of that. So the Buddhist viewpoint, the genuine Buddhist viewpoint, is of course the third option, which is that what happens to us is not the will of an external deity. It is not just a matter of chance, but it is based on causes and conditions which we ourselves have created, either in this lifetime or past lifetimes, and therefore how we respond to those karmic results is in itself creating fresh karma. So it is this continual cycle of which we ourselves are responsible. Therefore, we don't blame anyone else, and we don't even blame ourselves. Blaming ourselves also is pretty useless. Why not? Because if we met ourselves in a past life, we wouldn't even know ourselves. Who's this person? Well, probably a different race, maybe a different gender, maybe not even human. And next lifetime, who knows? So basically in this lifetime we're doing the best we can for somebody who we don't know, but we want to give them a nice package deal before they set off. So that's very kind of us, It's not that I will come back, right? This I is also impermanent. This I is also changing moment to moment to moment, like the river. But it's connected. It's connected. Every moment we are connected, just as when you were a baby, you were not who you are now, but nonetheless there was a flow, there was a connection there. And so next lifetime, likewise, where there will be a connection. I mean, many of the propensities which we have developed in this lifetime will be carried on. Which is why, people now, you're born, some people are, very musical, or artistic, or they like sports, or they're very mathematically talented, or some people are born very angry, other people are born with very sweet natures. It's not just a matter of genes and nurturing, it's also a matter of karma. Because if you see a little baby, you look in those eyes, that's a being there, that's a person. It's not blank. That's a person. And I'm sure many parents who have had many children can see they've had the same upbringing, they've got the same parents, and yet they're not the same. They're not like clones. Each one has a personality there, a being. And so we are also very much the result of habitual tendencies. So it's considered that at the time of death, not only the consciousness flows on, but also our tendencies, those ones which we repeat again and again. So next lifetime, we're likely to feel, those are also going to be habits, and so our propensities in this lifetime often are caused by a past life. So again, this is the idea that we all are responsible for who we are and where we are. That it's not because of some arbitrary decision on the part of some external deity, and it's not just, chance. Some people get born in good families, some people get born in desperate families. It's not just, well, it's the luck of the draw, a lottery. It's because we ourselves have created the causes and conditions for where we are and for what is happening to us. But then within that, we still have the free will as to how we will respond and deal with the situation. Even if we are born with very difficult circumstances, some people in very low circumstances have risen high. Other people who were born in very privileged circumstances have gone low. So this is because also not just karma, but how we have been dealing with the circumstances which we have to deal with. Because it's not like, what I think is very important is to understand karma isn't fate. That how we respond to given circumstances creates again a crossroads. Which way you're going to go. For example, in the Pali Canon, there is a story of one time the Buddha was outside some city wall, and there was this old tramp, this street person who was a drunk, and he just died. And he was like, there was a corpse outside the city wall. And the Buddha said, this person had been born in quite a good family, and he had married, and then he met Buddha, and he wanted to be a monk. And so he became a monk, and then his family and his former wife and everybody persuaded him to come back home again. And so then he gave up being a monk and went back home. And then in time he became a drunkard and a gambler and lost everything. And his wife left him, and the family disowned him. And in the end he just ended up as a drunken street person, and so he died there. And the Buddha said if he had stayed a monk, then he would have become an arhat. He would have been free. But because he chose the other way, then he ended up the way he did, as a derelict. And so that shows, as just an extreme example, that it's not all set down. He had a choice. And depending which way he went, then next set of karmas would come into being, right? It's changing patterns moment to moment, depending on which way we go. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's not all set out, yes, he had to do this, he had to do that. We have choices, and which way we choose, then the configurations move into dealing with that choice, and then what's going to happen next, and then again and again. So all the time we are creating, depending on, of course, the past karmas, that things will come into conditions, but nonetheless, these conditions and causes are always changing around all the time. It's not like it's all set out for us. We have to do this, we have to do that. It's not like that. Occasionally, certain things are, it's such a strong imprint which we made that it's almost sure that that is going to be the result. We know it in our life sometimes. Certain things we want to go this direction, but it's pushing us that direction, and we've got to have to go that direction because the karmic imprints were so strong that we have to have that result. But so many karmic imprints they're not that deep. And so they can change depending on how we play our hand. And so we shouldn't think, if we do this, that's going to happen. If we do this, that's going to happen. It's not like that. It's so much more plastic and so much more, depends on so many causes and conditions, never just one thing. But from our side, since we cannot see the whole pattern, the best we can do is that we try to be conscious and deal with the situation as skillfully as we can, including trying not to, when we see things which bring up anger or greed and grasping and jealousy and things like this, to recognize that and try to replace that with more skillful states of mind. Because we get blinded very much by our negative emotions. So karma in a Buddhist context is very important. I don't know how they can throw it out and call it Buddhism. Because it explains, the whole, it's such a vast picture, along with the cosmos, which is so vast and beyond thought. And likewise, all our rebirths in so many different realms of being is beyond thought. Our minds are very limited. One of the, if in Buddhism there are two kinds of meditation, mostly stress. One is the calm abiding meditation, shamatha, and the other is the insight meditation, which comes from having a very calm and lucid mind. But in those schools of Buddhism where the calm abiding shamatha is very much stressed, one of the signs of success in that is the knowledge of past lives. And as I said, I just came from Burma, from Myanmar, and certain schools of meditation there very much stress these going into these what are called jhanas. And one of the results of going into jhanas is that the mind opens up parts of the mind, the brain which normally are closed, not accessed, open. And one of that is for the recognition of past lives. And apparently, there where they go in for that sort of thing, then it's very common. And what they say is useful is that one can see how everything fits together and why things happen in this lifetime. You can see it because the cause is created in the past, and that now it's coming to fruition. But because we've planted so many seeds, we never know which ones are going to come up or when they're going to come up. And so we cannot plan it. The best we can do is to get that inner sense of, as I say, it's a bit like a surfboard or a boat. The waves go up and waves go down, but if you're on a boat, then even you go up and down a bit, we're not immersed. We're not completely overwhelmed because we have the protection of being in a boat. So that's the inner protection of our mind through our awareness and through our compassion. Then whatever happens, we will deal with it. It's okay. One saw that, also like when the first Tibetans came over, back in the late 50s and the early 60s, they were very traumatized. They'd lost everything. They'd seen all their whole culture trashed before their eyes, all their monasteries blown up, and all the people being killed and tortured and humiliated. Terrible, horrible things happening. But when they arrived, they were okay. In fact, they were quite cheerful. People who were used to working with refugees were very puzzled. They'd never met refugees like this. They weren't bitter, they weren't angry, they weren't exceptionally, especially the lamas, were not traumatized even. And they were just, okay. This was, because of things which we had done in the past that, caused this to happen, and now let's get on with it. So it's this inner security which is very important for us in our lives. Not to worry about our karma, what did I do last time, this is happening now. It's not important. What is important is what are we doing in this lifetime. Past lifetimes are gone, who cares? But in this lifetime, what am I doing with this life? To make it meaningful and of benefit for myself, for others. Because then we know, well, in the future, whatever happens, it's okay, we did the best we could with this life. And so then the last of these four contemplations, which is what we've been dealing with, I think we're going to finish early, is again the fact that samsara is not a joyride. The fact that samsara is a problem by its very nature because we do not see things as they really are. When we're thinking of samsara and the opposite, nirvana, it is not that nirvana is some kind of heavenly state out there. Samsara, nirvana, is not dealing with our external, whether we live in a city or whether we live in a country, which country we belong to. Samsara, nirvana, is our mind, right? As long as we are in a state of ignorance, we are in samsara. When we recognize the true nature of reality, which is the nature of our mind, we are in nirvana, right? Outwardly nothing changes, inwardly everything changes. So when we are talking, that will come up later when we're dealing with turning confusion into wisdom. But it's very important to recognize that when we're talking about samsara, it doesn't just mean, you know, there's too much traffic and there's pollution and, you know, there's too much crime and there's this or there's that. Nowhere that we live on this earth, you know, you can go to Switzerland, but it's still samsara, right? I mean, you can be living in a 8-star hotel or pleasure spa, it's still samsara. Because samsara isn't out there, samsara is our mind. And as long as our mind is in a state of unknowing, we are going to be in samsara, right? Yes? So in nirvana is when we realize the way things really are, and there's that inner freedom. Outwardly we could still be in the same situation completely, but inwardly everything is released. So when we talk about the wretched state of samsara, it has to be understood that it's not just doing with pollution levels or poverty and you know, the amounts of rapes and sexual harassments and murders and corruptions and things like this. And if we could solve all that, then we would be in nirvana. Because that's not what it's talking about. Do you understand? I mean, it's not to do with external circumstances. I mean, we could be staying in the utmost luxury with everybody being ethically very pure and everybody being very lovely and kind and friendly, but it's still samsara. Until we develop the genuine wisdom, compassion mind, which sets us free. The more, it's like, okay, it's a common example. We're all in prison. Samsara is a huge prison house. One time I had this dream, so I bring it up here because it's relevant. I dreamt that we were in prison. And there were penthouse suites where everybody was, you know, drinking champagne and partying. And there were the dungeons where people were languishing in agony and tortured and absolutely distraught and miserable. And there were all the places in between. I could see all these levels, some people working, some people partying, some people crying, some people laughing, all these different vignettes of people. But we were all in prison. And at the time, I thought those people in the penthouse anytime could go into the dungeons, just as those people in the dungeons could go up. It was all very insecure because we didn't know. But wherever we were still trapped in that prison. And so in my dream, I thought, well, we have to get out of prison. So I spoke to some of my friends and said, you know, this is a big jail. This is a big prison house. We've got to escape. And some of them said, yeah, well, it's prison, but it's not so bad. It's all right. And I thought, no, you don't know. It's prison. It's very insecure. We don't know. We have no freedom. And then other people said, well, yeah, it would be good to get out, but, you know, nobody gets out. It's really very difficult. So, you know, we just have to accept we're in prison. But eventually, a few friends said, well, all right, we'll try and get out if you help us to get out. So then in a dream there was this kind of stream, and there were these sort of flat boats, and there were prison guards, but nobody tried to stop us. And so we got in this boat and we sailed down the stream until we got on the outside of the prison. And so then we started running. And I was running, we were running. And on this side, there were all these windows lit up, all these like, you know, huge building with all these, and you could see the people, some people were laughing, some people crying, some people working, some people studying, some people, all different. Each window was lit up with different people doing different things in the prison. And I was running, and the prison never ended, just going past it, but there it was. And I thought, oh, this is impossible. It's just like they said, you know, this prison is endless. I'm just exhausting myself and I'm never getting out, you know, although we're outside on one level, still the prison is there. And I'm never going to get out. So they're right, let's go back. And then I thought, but if I give up, my friends will give up. Because they're only keeping going because I'm keeping going. So, not for the sake of myself, but for the sake of them, I have to keep going. And then when I thought that, and started running for their sake, not for my sake, the prison ended. So that's the point. The point is that we're all trapped in this prison house. But if we make the aspiration, which will come this afternoon, that we will genuinely try to go beyond the prison house, not just for the sake of ourselves, but in order to open the door for others also to get out, then the whole scene shifts. The ego is undermined. I don't say that we immediately get liberated, but nonetheless, the one thing the ego does not want to do is keep in samsara, struggling away for the sake of others. So even if a glimmer of that idea comes into our mind, everything changes. And, you know, in time, presumably, samsara becomes nirvana. But in the meantime, samsara means everything. I mean, it's not just, as I say, it doesn't mean just when we're suffering. Even the gods are in samsara. It's not that, you know, when we're having, you know, if we make good karma and we then are, you know, having a good time and we're even born in the celestial realms. In Buddhism, the heavenly realms likewise are within the wheel of samsara. And this wheel is kept going by our greed and our aversion, our like-dislike reactions, and the underlying unknowing, which keeps the whole wheel going round and round and round and round and never stops. So until we break that wheel, and the place to break the wheel is at the center hub of our like, dislike, indifference, especially the unknowing, avidya. We don't see. And this is our real problem. We do not see things as they really are, because we are always seeing it with our distorted vision, based on this sense of me and mine. And because of that, we're trapped. So some people, you know, prison is quite pleasant. Other people, prison is like a hell realm, but it's a prison. And we never know. Penthouse this life, dungeons next. Dungeons this life, penthouse next. We know. Even in this lifetime, you know, people's life situations change. But whether it seems like very nice and pleasant or very difficult and challenging, it's also so endless, endless, until we break the wheel. So that's why we need to turn our mind to the Dharma. Right? In other words, we need to put the Dharma at the center of our lives, not at the periphery when we've got a bit of time. Yeah, we'll go, you know, to our local temple or to, you know, Dharma center, or we'll read a Dharma book or something. Some big, you know, flash guru is in town, so we'll go along. And the rest of the time, life is life. Our family is our family. Our workplace is our workplace. Then nothing changes. But when we recognize that the Dharma really is like the yeast in the midst of this heavy dough of our daily life, then if we put the yeast there and mix it, you don't need much yeast, but the bit of yeast you have, all the dough rises. We don't throw the dough out. The dough is the bread. But it just needs that yeast to leaven it all and transform it from something heavy into something with such potential if we bake it. And it's nourishing, delicious. So our lives, likewise, if we just mix them with some Dharma insights, are no longer heavy and indigestible. Everything is a teaching for us. Everything is an opportunity to apply our Dharma practices, our Dharma view. Yeah, things are difficult, and we, you know, there are opportunity for mind training. In difficult circumstances with people, then there are opportunity for cultivating patience, for cultivating compassion, for cultivating calm in the midst of storms. Everything is there to help us if only we're open and aware. then daily life becomes our Dharma practice. It's very true. I mean, the best teachers are our own family and intimate circle. They're the ones who really teach them. And if we, are in the Dharma center, all sweetness and smiles, and then we go home and I mean, really, the real indication of whether our practice is working is when people say, you've become so much nicer nowadays. If people think you're even worse, then we're doing something wrong. Yeah? More grouchy, more sensitive, more impatient. Then what? What have we learned? We try to transform our mind, and of course, there is an ultimate transformation, but in the meantime, there are lots of steps. And the more that things are difficult, the more there are opportunities for as I sometimes say, it's like going to a gymnasium. You go to a gymnasium to work on these hard machines in order to get strong muscles. If the machines are too easy, then you're not going to get strong. And so in life, you don't want to spend all life on a machine, but nonetheless, sometimes, that's what's going to really, show us what we're made of. If everything is always very easy, then it's easy to think we know and we understand much more than we do. It's when there are challenges, then they're very helpful, because then we can really begin to say, how are we responding, how are we learning? Actually, are we any better at our responses than somebody who's never even heard the word Dharma in their lives? I mean, some of them are much better at dealing with difficulties than we are. With all our talk about, how much practice we've done and how many books we've, read and how many lamas we've met, and so what? I mean, the real teachers are our daily life. And so this is good also, because, if we fall flat on our face, never mind, we pick ourselves up again. So samsara is our opportunity. I mean, while we are in samsara, this is our training board. Somebody said that, what did they say? Something about, the quote's gone out of my mind, but it means that, our life is our, the classroom, that's right. Life is the classroom of the soul. Well, Buddhists don't have souls, but nonetheless, the idea that it is the classroom which we are learning lessons. And if the lessons are too easy, then children are bored. Children go there in order to have their minds stretched. And likewise in our life, we have to learn something from that. It's teaching us something the whole time, pointing something out, which maybe we keep missing. We're not picking up that lesson. So we have to learn it again and again and again. We have lots of chances, we keep going through life after life, often probably repeating the same patterns until we pass that exam and go on to the next. So really, samsara, samsara is difficult, samsara by its very nature is a problem, but it's also a training ground. This is where we learn. This is where we really begin to gather our inner forces, our forces of compassion, patience, loving kindness, wisdom, discernment, and awareness. So, this is all in order to encourage us to really value Dharma and put it at the center of our lives. You know, as I said at the beginning, you know, many people are born into a Buddhist environment and they carry out the external, they go to temples, they make offerings, they do recite prayers, they do prostrations, but inwardly, their mind is not attuned to the Dharma. You know, it's just convention, really. And the idea of which is to transform the mind, to understand the mind, to cultivate the mind, transcend the mind, that is just simply not there. So the Dharma is not at the center of their lives. The Dharma is not the tuning fork which they create harmony in their lives. And so the first thing is to really, really attune our hearts to the Dharma, so that everything we do in life is from a Dharmic point of view, that it's completely merged with our life. It's not just something we do in the, when we have a bit of spare time, but every single thing we think, just to know our thoughts, that would be a big thing. And to see how our minds work under varying circumstances with varying people, to be more and more conscious, more and more aware, more and more waking up. As you know, the word for Buddha means to awake. So that's what we're trying to do. We're all sleeping the sleep of ignorance. We're trying to wake up. And so all Buddhist practices are designed to try to help us to wake up. Wake up from our sleep of ignorance, our unknowing. We just don't get it. And that's why we're in samsara. Samsara is just a state of mind. When our consciousness shifts, then we're in the body. Nothing outside changes. But inside, everything changes. So, bit by bit, we try to understand the mind, understand what is going on beyond this surface chatter. So, although we are a little early, I must finish here. I think we'll be blah, 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 blah. Let's sit for 5 minutes. Are you okay? Are your legs all aching? Only 5 minutes. We just quietly sit. And then we have a break for lunch. And then we come back again at some point. When do we come back? We come back at 3. We come back at 3. Okay, so now let's just sit quietly. And again, as I say, just really just breathe. Know we're breathing. Just right in this moment, there's no problem. Maybe your knees are aching, that's a problem. But beyond that, nothing. And let everything else go. All the thoughts are just background chatter. Don't give them any importance, any attention, any noise we might hear. It's just sound. It goes in, it goes out. Don't catch it. Just relax. Mind open, spacious, but at the same time, focus quietly on the breathing in and the breathing out. Just for 5 minutes. before we depart, is there anybody who has any particularly pressing questions?
We spoke about death and impermanence. We spoke about death and impermanence. And
Yeah.
you said that at the time.
Just 1 minute, we'll give you a microphone because...
You spoke about death and impermanence, and you said that at the time of death, it would be ideal if you could help the person passing on. But when somebody commits suicide, that's really not possible. So my question is that what is the Buddhist view on suicide, and is there something that you can do for a being who has departed in that manner?
That's a good question. Of course, from the Buddhist point of view, suicide naturally is not a good thing. For one thing, you are taking the life of a human being, even if it's your own life. And secondly, since the attitude of mind or the thought of mind at the time of passing is considered to be very important. If a person, when they are committing suicide, is in a state of great despair, then of course this is not very good. I mean, in all ways, it's not a good way to go, as everybody knows. But one can help, especially just after the suicide. If anyone can arrange for prayers to be said on their behalf. This is always very helpful because according to the Buddhist view, after you die, then you are in a state... You're joking. Oh no. All these written questions, right? And it's not no? Good. Anyway, no, this is a very important question. So, according to the Buddhist view, after you die, then normally, unless one is liberated at the time of death, one enters into 7 weeks of wandering in something called the intermediate state. So, especially for the first part of that, then definitely prayers and practices which are done on earth in the meantime can be very beneficial. I would say that it is helpful, especially the family are always distraught by someone's suicide. So if possible, it's good if one can, for example, go on pilgrimage, the family, because while you're on pilgrimage, then you're not just sitting by yourself in a room grieving. You're out there, and at the same time, in all the various pilgrimage places, you can do prayers, you can make offerings, you can make merit, positive karma to be dedicated to the one who died. And so at the time when someone has died, and especially someone who has committed suicide, very good to make offerings on their behalf to whatever you feel is a worthwhile cause, right? But also pilgrimage, because then you're going to sacred places, you're meeting other people, you can do, prayers, prostrations, and offerings, and so forth, and dedicate that merit to the one who has gone. And I think often if that person is in the bardo, then they would come to that place because you're thinking of them. And then they also, from their side, can also rejoice. They cannot make merit, but they can rejoice in other people's merit. Spirits often come where people are doing merit making, and they rejoice, it's called. They're happy for this happening. And that way they make merit for themselves. They themselves cannot offer candles and circumambulate, but they can rejoice in others who are doing that. And so in that way, it helps them because they are gaining merit, and also you are gaining merit and dedicating that merit to them. So in that way, it can be very helpful. And I think that that is probably the best one can do. And to get people to do, sponsor prayers and so forth on their behalf. And beyond that, to accept that, may they have a happy rebirth, and may all go well for them in the future as much as possible. It's a very sad situation, becoming more and more common, as we know. And the best we can do is from our side to make as much merit for them as possible, and not to grieve too much, because that just makes them feel worse and more guilty. But as I say, that's why I say pilgrimage, because it gets people out and doing things and meeting other people, and helps to stop the pain of their grief from being too intense. Yeah. Well, we have all these. Are they really not?
They're really not.
Oh, good.
For a private audience, just notes. There's a draw.
Oh, I see. Oh, good.
But there are lots of questions there.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
In the same connection, what are your thoughts on euthanasia in the sense of a person who's wanting to go because he's suffering? So what?
Again, it's only my personal opinion, because this didn't happen at the time of Buddha. So this whole question of euthanasia is again a modern challenge. It didn't exist before. And so again, I don't think there's any consensus on that. I mean, some people, like from a strictly traditional Buddhist point of view, it might be said that that is still taking life and human life, which is a very negative karma. And at the same time, the karma which created the sickness and the pain, maybe you're cutting it short so that it isn't completed, and then next lifetime you might have to come back and suffer again. Whereas if you go through the suffering, then maybe that will clear that karma, so that next time you won't have to do that again. So that's one way of looking at it, right? Another way of looking at it is to say, well, yes, but in that case, every time you have any sickness or toothache, you don't deal with it because, you've got that will spoil the karma. And you should just suffer until the karma is cleared or you die. Which nobody would agree with, right? If you're sick, you go to a doctor. And then you could say, well, that's because you have good karma to go to a good doctor. So in this way, as I'm saying, karma can, it changes all the time. And in that case, one could say, well, maybe one has the karma at this time to be able to practice euthanasia. Since the body is saying it's finished anyway, then, maybe it's time just to say goodbye to this body. It's a different question from should we pull the plug? Because that is something different. That is where normally, under ordinary circumstances, the body would have gone. And it's been artificially kept alive beyond what nature had intended. And so in that case, I think it's very sensible for people to, if they would prefer that they are not artificially extended beyond their time, if they're unconscious or whatever, to write now more and more in the West, at least they are making provisos that if they find themselves in that state, that they want their family to please pull the plug and they don't want to be kept on artificially. So then that's a different thing. And that's a kindness to stop the family feeling guilty, or the enormous cost of keeping people on in this way. So that is a kindness not only to the family but to the person, that they are released from a body which has ceased to function and allowed to go on. With euthanasia it's a little different because the body hasn't completely given up yet. It's mostly pain factor and the fact that they know they're not going to recover. I don't know, I cannot say. I think this is for everybody to make a choice for themselves, what they feel to be right for themselves. But on the other hand, since it is under extreme circumstances, since it is one's own life, then maybe it's fair enough that one should make a choice. The only problem is it can be very much misused. Like with your pet is a little bit sick, oh, let's put it to sleep. In other words, let's kill it because it's inconvenient. Whereas maybe the animal would like to die quietly, by itself, without being, deprived of its life ahead of time, because people don't like to see people suffering. So likewise in euthanasia, if it gets too common, then the minute you're in a situation which is uncomfortable and is not going to recover from it, then let's leave. And maybe that's not such a good thing, because many people, of course not to be in pain, but in other ways, it gives a chance for people to reevaluate their life. Many people with terminal illnesses go through great spiritual revolutions when they are actually faced with death. And maybe so it's good to have that time, not if they're in tremendous pain, but to relieve the pain and just nonetheless allow them to die naturally, rather than, the minute it's, it's uncomfortable, then I want to get out of it. So, I don't know, this is something which, for this reason, I think many people are not, there were some insights to the question. But I think on the whole, if one can die, if people can relieve pain, then people should at least be allowed to just die more naturally and not just immediately artificially end it all just because it's inconvenient. How do we know if we are doing enough, not wasting the causes and conditions, and how do I skillfully contact the guilt that not doing enough to end suffering? And you relax. This is not a 100-meter sprint. This is a marathon. And we have to pace ourselves. And it's very important not to make all this into another heavy burden on top of the burden we already have. So that we all feel, oh, I should have done this and I could do more, and this whole big backpack full of rocks on our back that we're carting along with us. It's not like that. As the Buddha said, it's a path of joy. And the Dharma should be making our lives more light, not more heavy. Okay? So no guilt. The most important thing is to try to develop a good heart and to try to be more aware during the day. Just to be more conscious, more aware, but not heavy. It's very, I really, it's not, the Dharma, there are times when we put efforts, like if we're in retreat, then, we make more effort. But nonetheless, it's not something, it's not an endurance test. Really, it's how can I say? I mean, effort should be effortless. And so therefore just a matter of being, just very simple, just, be kind. And kind not only to other people, but kind to ourselves. We should make friends with ourselves, encourage ourselves along. When we go wrong, never mind, try again. And, there should be a joy there, cheerfulness. We're trying to do it right. Make good karma, not make bad karma, and make sure that we're always thinking right thoughts and not thinking wrong thoughts. You sometimes you meet people like that, and you know that that's not the way it's meant to be, Whereas when you meet people who are really into the Dharma, then they're so joyful. I don't know. Lama Wandrak, who we just were meeting, he's a Lama who has this big nunnery in Tibet, where all the nuns sit up in meditation boxes and never lie down. I mean, they're effort. They never lie down. They're always practicing. They're so joyful. They're such a great lot. They're really, these nuns are wonderful. And the Lama just sits on his throne and laughs and laughs and laughs, especially when he's talking about bodhicitta or good nature. He just looks at everybody and then laughs and laughs and laughs. And he's so light. But he's a wonderful practitioner. And all these nuns are wonderful practitioners. They're totally devoted. But there's a joy there. So please, when you're practicing, practice with lightness, with joy. With kindness. But kindness first to ourselves, as well as kindness then spills out towards others. If it's too intense, if we're always judging ourselves, am I making the grade, then it's not right, So inwardly we should be relaxed, but focused, aware. That's all. Really, it's very, very, very important not to get hung up. What do you do if the person you seek forgiveness from does not forgive you? Well, that's their problem. Feel compassion. Because when we do not forgive others or we do not forgive ourselves, we are carrying that burden. It's like a wound which we're endlessly scratching and don't allow to heal. That's very, very sad. So if people cannot forgive us, then our response should just be genuine love and compassion towards them, because they're not in a happy state of mind. A happy state of mind will forgive. And an unhappy state of mind will not forgive. And then that's how it's sad. You forgive yourself, and you forgive them for not forgiving. I mean, just feel sorry for them. We cannot force people to forgive us. But don't worry about it. If from our side our intention is sincere, that's enough. Well, how people respond is their problem, not our problem. We can't do anything about that. All we can do is just to nonetheless feel sorry for them that they are not in the mind space to be able to, open up and forgive. How sad. Let it go. Don't make it a problem for ourselves. It's not our problem. From our side, we want to reconcile. If from their side they cannot reconcile, they're not ready to reconcile, then just to, I'm sorry. I've gone on, you haven't. We cannot, we are responsible for ourselves, but we cannot be responsible. As the Buddha said, we are all the heirs of our own karma. We are all the owners of our own karma. We are not the owners of other people's karma. They're responsible for their karma. We are responsible for our karma. So from our side, if our intentions are good and kind, how that is received is up to the other person. We cannot change other people. We only can try to change ourselves. So not to worry, not to make it into a deal. If people are still holding resentment, then, we can just feel sorry for that and send them loving kindness. But we cannot take responsibility for other people. No. Okay, so there we are. So, Nandiya,